Sorry. Technical difficulties here. So obviously, there are things that are morally repulsive about this ad, right? You know, indeed, there were a lot of complaints that the TV commercial obviously had millions of viewers, and many, or some, questioned the ethics of selling a brand and commodities like chocolates by co-opting the memory of a war that killed millions of people. And contrary to the massive literary, photographic, material and historical archive of the war, the Sainsbury ad occludes the war as war, despite aspiring to historical authenticity in its bilingualism, its costuming, food packaging, and other details. It shows no bodies ripped open by gunfire or shells, no soldiers gagging as they die from poison gas, no one treading trenches that brim with rats and mud. By contrast, Duffy's poem, steeped in the language of the First World War poetry, not only celebrates the magical interlude. A Berliner was the first from his ditch to climb, a Shropshire lad ran at him like a lion, but as you remember, spotlights a rat on the glove of a corpse, men who drown in mud or are gassed, shot, or vaporized, the sprawled mute shapes of those who had died. The Sainsbury commercial, of course, was hardly the first such commercial to seek financial gain by tapping into an idealism that wipes away the grimmer realities of history. But that said, all of that said, for all its distortions, I wonder if the TV ad, like poems, songs, museum exhibits, historical books, and other recent remembrances of the Christmas truce, may have performed, a little bit of useful cultural work in making widely visible the human solidarities between combatants on opposing sides of the war. Other more nuanced, less exploitative representations, I think, allow a fuller recovery and re-examination of these trench-spanning impulses. Among them, the poems that I've tried to foreground in that essay, written by soldiers, officers, civilians, others during the war. Neither whitewashing in their idealism nor myopic in their realism, they provide a complex exploration of feeling for the enemy at a time of global war. They also reveal that however compelling we may find the Christmas truce, such sentiments were hardly restricted to a single historical episode. Now, more broadly, the war obviously represents a moment, important moment in the history of globalization, understood neither in terms of the longue durée, as old as mankind, nor the short-term view as a globalization arrived at the internet, but as a very long-term set of processes that intensify, especially for me, from the late 19th century. As historians Osterhammel and Pedersen state, represented, quote, that is, the war represented both convulsively intensified interaction and the destruction of long-standing networks. A war, obviously, that joined several million troops from India, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, Canada, and the US. It marks, in a way, the war, the end of a period when historians such as Michael Lang, one of our several distinguished panelists, have argued economic integration and exchange reach levels that by some measures exceed those of today, when, as he says, global integration is both exaggerated and precedented. In the lead up to the war, as Lang puts it, the deepening internationalization of the economy intensified political tensions between European states. It's a culmination of a period of contradictory historical vectors, both intensifying internationalism and nationalism, globalization and state building, the growth of the world economy and the intervention of state, economic interdependence and protectionism, mass migration, and ever stronger restrictions on immigration. Sound familiar? The poems, I think, give us a close-up view of what it means to be trying to persist in seeking human bonds, exploring human bonds across national differences, even while in some cases violently fighting on behalf of a nation or an empire. These poems are cosmopolitan, not in the sense of airily transcendent detachment from bonds, but of grounded attachments that span specific cultural and national differences. Bruce Robins's located and embodied cosmopolitanism, or what the philosopher Kwame Anthony Appiah calls a partial or rooted cosmopolitanism, in that they illuminate the felt or experiential basis for some of the more abstract forms of cosmopolitanism as literary spaces for linguistically, formally, and enacting and reflecting on transnational imaginative solidarities. I think they're really important for our own particular cultural moment. All right, so I won't, I think my time is up, so I'll just remind you really, really quickly of some of the key texts that I hit here. Rosenberg's great Break of Day in the Trenches, and the rat figure there, who exemplifies these cosmopolitan sympathies by touching an English hand and then a German crossing the sleeping green between. This is the OED entry on the word rat, which marvelously exhibits both German and French cognates, and of course also then has Yiddish, which was, as I mentioned in the essay, Rosenberg's only language until he was about 7 years old. Links, as in the word Ratzenloch, or rat hole. And then there's this long history of rats and rhyming, which I won't go into. Thomas Hardy, just marvelous, I think, again, with this sort of, what I think of as almost etymological cosmopolitanism, finding even in the ingredients of our language, strong connections across the divisions that war imposes, the traces of German in West Country dialect in Germany. The wonderful, I love this picture, which some of you might be familiar with, the warring King George and Kaiser Wilhelm II, who were of course first cousins, both of them grandsons of Queen Victoria. The poems, I think as Paul Gilroy suggests, talking about a vital planetary humanism, Richard Rorty talking about human solidarity across differences through the imagination, constructed out of little pieces, as he calls them, or what Kwame Anthony Appiah calls how our cosmopolitanism is based not on a theoretical understanding of having a commonly understood common nature, but particulars, some small thing that we share. Martha Nussbaum as well. And I think these poems, like Canadian Robert Service's Only a Bosch, demonstrate these kinds of connections through these little particulars of a locket or the sweat or blood that is shared with a dying German soldier. Strange Meeting, Wilfred Owen. I tried to connect with Freud on Das Unheimliche, and then the wonderful, incredibly powerful ending of that poem. Originally, I was a German conscript and your friend, then later enemy, you killed my friend, yoking together in poetry of those contrary impulses. And finally, I end up with Seamus Heaney as a more contemporary variation on many of these themes in the Irish Catholic Protestant context, as well as Mary Borden and a kind of the environmental devastation of the war as a kind of precursor glimpse of what we'll later call the Anthropocene and the kind of global interconnectedness of our fate as we face global devastation. Gilroy again talking about these acts of solidarity, spirits of connection, translocal solidarities that can help to bridge differences. So I'll leave it at that, but I hope that was a helpful reminder for a few themes and adding a few more thoughts about this theme. But what I'm really looking forward to is hearing from my fellow panelists, so I will leave it at that. Thank you so much.